The attic held its breath. Anton stood by the window, his back to the room, a dark shape carved out by the incoming sun. Dust motes danced in the long, narrow shafts of light, swirling in the stillness like slow-motion snow. Every surface was blanketed in a thin,
gray layer of time. He did not move. He did not shift his weight.
The silence here was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of years left undisturbed. Outside, the world continued its frantic pace, but inside this space, everything had stopped. The floorboards beneath him groaned once, a dry, sharp sound that died instantly in the stagnant air. He watched the light crawl across the wooden slats, illuminating the textures of forgotten crates and stacked memories. The air tasted of cedar and dry paper. He remained perfectly motionless, anchored by the quiet, while the motes continued their aimless, circular drift through the warm, golden glow. He was waiting for something, or perhaps he was simply allowing the room to settle around him before he began the work of sorting through what remained of his past. Anton shifted his weight, his boots scraping softly against the floor. He stepped away from the window and turned toward the center of the room. A single, heavy crate sat in the corner, labeled Old Plans in fading charcoal. He knelt before it. The wood was rough under his palms as he gripped the lid and pulled. It resisted, then gave way with a dry, splintering crack that echoed in the rafters. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed newsprint, lay a worn notebook. He lifted it carefully. The leather cover was brittle, flaking away as he opened it to the first page. His eyes scanned the entries written in his own hand. Savings goal, $500. Emergency fund, $1,000. Monthly essentials, $120. He stopped there. The ink was dark, precise, and certain. He pressed his index finger against the paper, tracing the loops of the numbers.
He held his breath, reading the figures again, feeling the weight of the past intent. The numbers seemed small now, distant echoes of a plan made in a different life. He stared at the page,
the silence of the attic pressing in as he contrasted these forgotten goals with the reality of the room around him. Anton stood up, his knees popping in the quiet room. He turned his back to the notebook and walked toward a wooden crate near the wall. A guitar leaned against it, strings dull and coated in a fine layer of gray dust. He reached out, his hand hovering over the wood. He remembered the day he bought it. $80. It had felt like a significant investment then. He pulled a small, laminated tag from a nearby shelf, likely left from a previous organizing attempt. It belonged to a newer, similar model, his eyes fixed on the bold ink. $150 to $200.
He looked back at his own guitar. The wood was the same, the shape was the same,
but the value had shifted in ways he had not tracked. The realization pulled at his focus. It was not just the passage of time, it was the erosion of purchasing power. He gripped the neck of the guitar, feeling the tension in the strings. The gap between 80 and 200 was not just a number, it was the weight of a changing economy. He stared at the instrument, the silence of the room now filled with the cold clarity of his new financial reality. Anton set the guitar aside, leaning it carefully against the crate. His hands felt the grit of the attic dust, but he did not pause to wipe them. He moved to a stack of canvases leaning against the chimney breast. He pulled the top one free, the frame clicking against the others as it came loose. He rotated the frame, inspecting the joints and the tension of the canvas. It was a landscape, the colors muted by age. He turned it over. Taped to the backing board was a small, handwritten index card. He squinted at the ink. $40 to $60. He blinked, shifting his focus from the image to the number. The painting was no longer just a piece of decor from a past project. It was a line item. He turned it over again, studying the frame with new intensity. He measured the wood with his thumb. calculating the potential resale. He placed it down on the floor, not with the carelessness of storage, but with the precision of a trader organizing inventory. He looked at the surrounding boxes, his eyes scanning for more items. Each object in the room began to take on a new geometry in his mind. He was not just clearing an attic anymore. He was mapping out a balance sheet. Anton turned his back on the stack of paintings, his movements becoming more deliberate. He stepped toward a forgotten corner and reached down. His fingers closed around the rough, dimpled surface of a leather basketball. He held it for a moment, testing the weight, feeling the dry leather against his palms. He stood in the center of the attic, where a single, thick shaft of afternoon light cut through the gloom. With a sharp, rhythmic motion, he drove the ball into the floorboards. The sound echoed in the confined space, a dull thud that vibrated through the soles of his feet. As the ball returned to his hand, a plume of fine gray dust rose from the impact point, swirling into the sliver of light like suspended glitter. He bounced it again, harder this time. The rhythmic thumping accelerated. Each impact sent more dust into the air, clouding the light, turning the atmosphere into a chaotic, shifting haze. He caught the ball and held it tight against his chest, his breathing steady despite the sudden exertion. He watched the dust motes settle, his eyes narrowed. The physical force had burned off the hesitation. He was ready to face the numbers. Anton moved to a sturdy wooden box and sat down, the surface creaking under his weight. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, dog-eared notepad and a stub of a pencil. He rested the pad on his knee,
the paper flat and waiting. He began to write, the tip of the pencil scratching against the fibers. He listed the guitar at $120. He added the paintings at $60. He noted the basketball at $15, then combined a scattering of loose items as miscellaneous,
valuing them at $100. He drew a line beneath the column. He paused, his pencil hovering over the page. He added the digits in his head, his brow furrowing as the sum settled into place. $295. He wrote the final total in bold, heavy strokes.
The number sat on the page, isolated and finite. He stared at it, the weight of the amount sinking in.
It was a meager sum for years of accumulation. He looked up from the pad, his gaze locking onto the camera lens.
The attic felt smaller, the air tighter. He did not look away. He absorbed the reality of the paper, the smallness of his current capital, and the necessity of what came next.
Anton did not put the notepad away. He held it firm, his knuckles white against the paper. The number 295 was no longer just a failure of accumulation. It was a baseline. He cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet attic. He spoke into the air, his voice steady and stripped of doubt. "Invest safely," he said, the words cutting through the stillness. He looked down at the list, then back up, his posture shifting from a slump to an upright. Alert stance. Start saving. Build wealth slowly. He recited the principles as if they were a hard-won map. Understand inflation. Find hidden value. Every word carried the weight of a corrective measure. He was done measuring what he had lost. He was now calculating what he could gain. He set the notepad down on the wooden box, not with a sigh, but with a deliberate, flat-handed tap. The transition was complete. He stood up, his movements fluid and purposeful. The room seemed to rearrange itself around his newfound intent. He was no longer a collector of forgotten things. He was a strategist of his own recovery. Anton remained standing, his feet planted firmly on the floorboards. The attic silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a vacuum waiting to be filled. He turned his head, his eyes finding the lens of the camera. He did not blink. He stared into the glass, his gaze unyielding and sharp. The internal friction that had defined his movements for hours began to smooth out. He tightened his jaw, the muscle at the hinge of his mouth pulsing once, then freezing. This was the point of no return. The past, represented by the crates and the dust, held no sway over him now.
He processed the shift in his own physiology, the way his shoulders pulled back and his chest opened.
He looked at himself through the lens, acknowledging the person he had been.
And then he consciously chose to move past that version of himself. The doubt that had clouded his decisions moments ago evaporated. He was not just looking at a device, he was confronting the witness to his transformation.
He let out a single, slow breath, his posture remaining rigid and unwavering.
The conflict between who he was and who he would become had reached its end. He was ready.
Anton broke his gaze first. He did not look back at the crates, the dusty notebook, or the items he had just appraised. Those objects were now just remnants of a previous cycle, stripped of their power to anchor him in place. He shifted his weight, pivoted on his heel, and turned his back on the center of the room. Every step he took toward the window felt like a deliberate shedding of weight. He walked slowly, his gait measured, avoiding the scattered boxes that cluttered the floorboards. The floor creaked under his boots, a sound that echoed in the vast, quiet space, but he did not falter. He navigated the narrow path between the stacks of forgotten things with the confidence of a man who no longer needed to look behind him. The air grew thinner and cleaner as he moved away from the dust-choked corners of the attic. Ahead, the window began to dominate his field of vision. It was no longer just a source of light, but a boundary between the life he had cataloged and the space he had yet to claim. He reached the edge of the clear floor space, his shadow stretching long and thin before him, pointing the way forward. He was leaving the stagnation behind, step by step, heading toward the open horizon. Anton arrived at the window. The wood frame felt cool under his fingertips as he braced himself. He took a final look at the attic, the dust motes now swirling in the periphery, no longer holding his attention. He turned his focus entirely to the glass. Outside, the world was bright, sharp, and unencumbered by the weight of old receipts or forgotten inventory. He raised his hand. His palm hovered for a second, a silent hesitation that acknowledged the finality of the moment. Then, he pressed it firmly against the pane. The glass was solid, cool, and clean. He did not pull away. The light from outside flooded the space, washing over his hand and climbing up his arm, turning the edges of his silhouette into white heat. He stood there, unmoving, his presence anchored by the contact. The dust in the room became irrelevant in the brilliance of the sun. He watched the horizon, his breathing steady, his mind quiet. There were no more lists to write, no more items to value. The transformation was complete. The light filled every corner of the frame, erasing the shadows of the attic, until only the brightness remained. He stayed, silent and still, as the world beyond the glass opened up to meet him.